My name is Maris Elwood. My family planned a trip to Paris and told me not to come because I'd ruin the vibe. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. But something cracked. I remembered every time they erased me, and this time, I erased myself from their story first. Not in silence, but in freedom. If this feels like something you've lived through, please stay and hear the whole story. Then tell me in the comments, was I right to finally walk away? Or did I give up too soon? I truly want to know. It was one of those afternoons that looked like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or not. Clouds low, the air still, that pale, silvery light covering everything like a soft dust sheet. Late spring in Asheville could feel like that, halfway between comforting and uncertain. I was standing at the sink, rinsing off a chipped mug from this morning's coffee. My hands moved without thinking. The rest of me? On autopilot. I had a podcast playing something about strategies for reaching disengaged 8th graders. Not that they ever told you how to reach disengaged grown-ups. The phone rang. I dried my hands with the dish towel that had long since lost its pattern. Glenda, Mom. I knew, even before answering, it wasn't going to be about me. Her voice came through, light and polite, like she was calling a neighbor for a recipe.
Hi, sweetheart.
You busy? That word always sounded heavier when she said it. Like it wasn't about time, but value. Were you worth being called into this conversation? I told her no, just catching up on some cleaning. She let a pause hang there. Well, she said, drawing it out like she was unwrapping something fragile. I just wanted to let you know, the whole family's going to Paris next month. I stared at the window over the sink. The glass had a smudge I hadn't cleaned in weeks. It's for Briar's birthday, his 47th, can you believe it? We thought, why not make it special? You know, he's been working so hard lately. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. My mouth said, that's nice. But my fingers were gripping the edge of the counter. She kept going, her voice lilting like she was walking through a garden path lined with excuses. I figured you probably had school stuff. Exams, grading, and all that. Didn't want to assume you'd want to go. My silence must have stretched just a second too long because she added, softer, too soft. We all just thought that might be best. Sometimes, well, you know how the energy can shift when you're around. And Paris, it's meant to be lighthearted. There it was. I didn't say much after that. Just the usual. No worries. I understand. The kind of line you toss out when you're choking on something and need to get off the phone. We hung up. I turned back to the sink, picked up another dish. A fork slipped out of my wet hand, clattering into the steel basin with a sharp clang that made me flinch. My hands were trembling. Not like shaking from anger, more like that vibration you feel when your insides don't know where to land. I'd always known I made them uncomfortable. Not because I screamed or stormed or caused scenes. I didn't. That wasn't my role. I was the quiet one. The easy-to-ignore one. The one you didn't invite, not because you didn't care, but because you assumed she wouldn't mind staying behind. There were birthday parties I barely remember, mostly because no one else did. My 12th? Mom forgot the cake. Said she was distracted prepping Briar for some math competition. I told her it was okay. I smiled while eating Jell-O from the fridge. At 28, I stood at the stove on Thanksgiving, cooking for 10 while everyone else laughed in the living room. When the family photo was taken, they forgot to call me in. I was still peeling yams. And when I got that teaching award, regional, not national, but still something, no one asked what it was for. Mom said, "That's nice, honey," before asking if I could help her rebook her nail appointment. I used to think it was me. That maybe if I talked less, smiled more, wore colors that didn't bring the room down, I'd get a real seat at the table. Not just the folding one in the corner. But somewhere along the line, I stopped trying to sit at their table. I started learning how to step back before they could shove me out of frame. That night, after the dishes were done and the silence of my house had fully settled, I sat on the couch. Picked up my phone. No text to send. No calls to make. Just me and that screen's soft glow. I opened the front-facing camera, not to take a picture. Just to look. My face looked tired, but not broken. My eyes? Still there, still seeing. And I thought, they didn't push me out. They just got so used to me walking away on my own it became part of the script. And I played along. For years. Quietly exiting scenes I was never really written into. But maybe, just maybe, this time I wouldn't. Maybe I'd stay. Even if it meant standing alone. The days that followed the phone call felt strangely hollow. Not painful exactly, just flat. Like I was living in a house where someone had taken all the pictures off the walls. Everything still worked. The lights came on. The stove heated up. But there was no warmth anywhere. I got up each morning like I always did, 5:45 sharp. Fed the cat, brewed my coffee, reviewed my lesson plan. At school, I went through the motions. My students still called me Miss Elwood with that tired but respectful tone 8th graders have when they know you're one of the good ones. And I smiled at them. I gave them everything I had in the tank. And still, I'd find myself standing by the whiteboard with a dry erase marker in hand, trying to remember what I was about to say, while my mind replayed Mom's voice like it was stuck on loop. Paris is meant to be lighthearted. I kept asking myself, maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe I really did make things heavier. Maybe I had this energy, this quietness, that just changed the air. So I did what I always did when something threatened to rise too close to the surface. I tucked it down. I emailed Briar, told him happy early birthday, hoped the trip would be beautiful. Take lots of pictures, I wrote. Paris in the spring must be something. He never replied. Not a surprise. That Friday, during silent reading, one of my students, Alana, the kind who always notices things, looked up and asked, Miss Elwood, are you going to Paris too? I blinked. Excuse me? She turned her iPad around. A photo of my mom, Dad, and Briar standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, already posted online. Big smiles. Coordinated outfits. Mom's caption read, Finally the family together, joyful and complete. Alana tilted her head, waiting. You look kinda like your mom. That's her, right? I forced a smile. I'm not on that trip, sweetie. But yes, that's my family. Her eyebrows knit in confusion, like something didn't add up. Then she shrugged, satisfied with my answer, and went back to her book. But I just stood there, watching her read, wondering when I'd started being the one nobody even asked about. That night, I couldn't settle. The silence in my house felt like a pressure system. I opened my bedroom window and let the mountain air spill in. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a book I'd already read 3 times, and stared at the page without seeing it. That's when I heard the knock on the door. I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone with the wrong address. But it was Doreen, my next-door neighbor, retired high school English teacher, widow, and the kind of woman who still wore slacks and a brooch just to water her azaleas. She had a book tucked under her arm and a small tin of lemon bars. I came to return this, she said, holding out a worn copy of Jane Eyre. And I figured you might like a little sugar. I invited her in. Not out of friendliness, just reflex. Something polite to fill the space. We sat in the kitchen. I made tea, even though I didn't feel like it. She watched me quietly, like she was waiting for something not said yet. You look like someone who's been told not to take up too much space, she said after a while. I froze with a sugar spoon halfway to my cup. She continued, unbothered, almost offhand. There's a certain look people get when they've learned to step aside before being asked to. I looked down at my hands, now resting in my lap. I didn't reply. She sipped her tea. They didn't forget you, you know. People like that never forget. They just don't see you as the part they want to show. Not in pictures, not in stories. I blinked. Swallowed. Still no words came. She leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp and kind at once. It's not that you don't belong. It's that you don't match the version of the family they want to project. And there it was. A simple sentence, like someone had reached into my ribcage and turned on a light. She didn't say it with pity. She said it like a fact, like weather, like gravity. I sat there, stunned by how much truth could fit into one woman's voice. We didn't talk much after that. She finished her tea. I walked her to the door. Just before stepping out, she paused. You know, sometimes the ones who stay quiet are the only ones who see things clearly. Then she left. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, hand still resting on the doorknob. The air in the house had shifted. Not warmer, exactly, but clearer. Maybe, for once, I wasn't imagining things. Maybe someone else had seen it too. 2 days after Doreen left, I got a message from my mother. It was short and straight to the point. She wanted to know if I could stop by the house while they were away, to feed the cat, check the mail, make sure the security system didn't glitch again. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Not even a thank you in advance. Just a bullet list of tasks like I was the housekeeper on rotation. I stared at the screen for a good minute. Not angry, just stunned by how unsurprising it felt. I wasn't invited to the trip, but I was trusted to keep the lights on, make sure the lawn didn't go wild, and ensure that Ginger, the 15-year-old cat that barely tolerated me, got her medication. I could have said no. I should have said no. Instead, I typed back, "Sure. I'll take care of it." And I hit send. The moment my thumb left the screen, something in my chest sank. It wasn't about the cat. It wasn't about the house. It was about the fact that I still couldn't bring myself to draw a line. Even after everything, after being told I ruined the vibe, I was still making myself available, still asking for scraps in the form of responsibility. That night, I found myself digging through an old drawer, the one filled with things I never used but never quite threw away. At the bottom, between expired coupons and dried-out pens, was the journal I kept in grad school. I hadn't written in it since the week I got my master's degree. I flipped to that page and just stared. May 18th. My name in calligraphy on a cheap diploma cover. One friend came. Madison. She brought daisies and took my picture in front of the admin building.
My mom didn't show.
She called an hour later. Said Briar had a meeting across town, and she had to lend him the car. You understand, don't you? He's on the verge of something big. I told her I understood. And I wrote it down because I was tired of forgetting the things I forgave too quickly. That journal had 10 more blank pages. I picked up a pen and turned to a fresh one. I wrote, "I'm not invisible. They just built a home where I was easier to manage when I didn't take up space. Where I was the background hum behind Briar's spotlight." The words flowed faster than I expected. My fingers ached with them, and I didn't stop. The next evening, I got an email from Mom. She'd attached a photo of a checklist: feed Ginger twice daily, bring in any packages, water the hydrangeas. No greeting, no signature. But what caught me off guard was the little smiley face she'd added next to check the alarm system. A smiley face. Like that made the whole thing feel warm. I clicked out without replying. Later that night, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification Facebook Live. I never watched those. But this one said, "Glenda Elwood is live. Eiffel Tower at sunset." Something made me click. The video was grainy, but there they were, my mom, my dad, Briar, all standing in front of the iron lattice with glasses of champagne. The camera wobbled a little before settling. Mom was laughing. "Oh, I wish Maris could see this," she said, then added quickly, "Well, I mean, we're having such a light trip this time. No weird tension. Everyone's just relaxed." Then Briar chimed in, raising his glass. "No overthinking. No eggshells. Just vibes." They laughed. Together. The kind of laugh that wasn't cruel outright, but still cut sharper than silence. Then she said, with that sing-song tone she used when she was about to end a conversation, "This is what family is supposed to feel like." I closed the laptop. Not with force. Not in anger. Just gently. Like placing a lid on something you're done looking at.
I didn't cry.
My hands were shaking a little, but my eyes stayed dry. And that scared me more than tears would have. Because it meant I wasn't shocked anymore. I wasn't waiting for it to change. I reached for the journal again and wrote, "They don't miss me. They miss what they imagine I would be if I were quieter, simpler, easier to explain to their friends. If I didn't carry history. If I didn't ask for more than being useful." Then I paused. And I underlined the next sentence twice. They didn't forget me. They just decided I wasn't part of the version of us they like best. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. The knock came again on a Saturday morning, soft but steady. I opened the door to find Doreen standing there in her usual pressed slacks, a cardigan over a linen blouse, holding a cardboard box with both arms like it weighed more emotionally than physically. She didn't wait to be asked. "Thought you might want to look through some of these," she said, nudging the box into my hands. "Some of them are worth keeping. Others might make you mad. Either way, they don't belong gathering dust in my place anymore." I thanked her out of habit and set the box on the dining table. She didn't sit, just stood there watching me like she was waiting to see if I'd open it now or later. I took the hint. Inside were paperbacks with broken spines, a few folders, and one thin hardback wrapped in a plastic bag like it was the only one that mattered. The title was handwritten across the cover in faded ink, "Letters to a Daughter They Never Knew." I glanced up. She shrugged. It was written by a woman I taught with once. Self-published. She never had a daughter. Just a lot of regrets. I nodded, not fully sure what to make of it, but something told me this wasn't the kind of thing you ignored. She left a few minutes later, saying only, "Give it a read. And Maris, read slow." That night, after cleaning up from dinner, I barely tasted. I sat on the floor in front of the couch with that book in my lap, my back against the cushions. I opened it. The first letter started simple. "Dear daughter, I imagined you different than me. I thought I would know how to love you if you were bright and bold and easy. But you came quiet. You came complex. And I kept trying to simplify you into someone I could understand." I stopped breathing. I turned the page. "You have always been there. I just never learned how to look at you straight on." The words weren't dramatic. There was no apology wrapped in flowers. It was confession. Honest. Ugly and beautiful all at once. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the page until my vision blurred, and the words softened like they'd been written in water. But then it came. Not like a storm, but like a leak in the ceiling that finally gave way. I pulled my knees up, curled in on myself, and sobbed, not from anger, not even from sadness, just from being seen. Because someone, this stranger, this author I'd never met, had put into print the thing I'd never had the nerve to name. That maybe it wasn't that I was too much or not enough. Maybe I just wasn't what they expected. And they never adjusted their lens. I must have sat there an hour. When the tears dried, I felt hollowed out, but not empty. Lighter somehow. The next morning, Doreen came by again. This time with 2 cups of coffee from the bakery down the street. She didn't ask if she could come in. Just handed me the cup and sat down like this was her kitchen too. We didn't speak right away. The coffee was good, strong, a little burnt, just how I liked it. Then she looked at me over the rim of her mug. "I'm guessing you read it." I nodded.
Twice.
She set her cup down and folded her hands in her lap. "You ever been anywhere quiet enough that you finally heard yourself think?" I thought of my house. The kind of quiet that hummed with discomfort.
Not really, I said.
She gave a half smile. "You should go to Vermont." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "My cabin. Blackbird Nest. I bought it years ago, used to take my husband there when we both got too tired of pretending we liked the country club set. Haven't been in a while. But it's still there."
Stocked. Warm.
Nobody around for miles. I stared at her. "Why are you offering this?" She leaned forward, her voice low but sure. "Because this place doesn't deserve all of you right now. And you don't need to keep auditioning for people who already decided you're not castable. You're not running away, Maris. You're just choosing not to sit in the audience for a show that never let you on stage." I swallowed hard. I wouldn't know what to do with myself, I said, and it came out sounding smaller than I meant it to. She tilted her head. "That's the whole point. Let the silence teach you." She stood to leave, but paused at the door. Her last words felt like they landed somewhere deep in my ribcage. "You know why people find you hard to be around? It's not because you make things heavy. It's because you don't make it easy for them to keep being who they are when they're being cruel." The door shut behind her, soft and final. And I stood there, holding that book in one hand and a set of keys she'd left on the table in the other. I didn't tell anyone at school the real reason I needed the 3 days off. I logged it as personal time, wrote up lesson plans so detailed they could have passed for a novella, and even labeled extra worksheets just in case. That's what being the dependable one teaches you. Leave things neater than you found them, even when you're falling apart. No one asked why I was stepping away. No one ever really does when you wear your steadiness like armor. You could be bleeding underneath it, and folks would just compliment how polished you look. The morning I left Asheville, the clouds hung low, the color of wet pavement. It wasn't raining yet, but the air carried that damp promise. I packed light, a suitcase with 2 soft sweaters, my favorite worn jeans, hiking boots that still had Pisgah dirt on them, and 3 books I kept pretending I'd read someday. I tossed in my old journal too, the green one with the cracked spine, and a coffee stain on page 13. The one that still held notes from when I was 25 and thought maybe things were just a phase. I started driving before the town woke up. The roads were still dark, but not heavy. I turned on a playlist of old voice memos I used to record for my students. My voice, years younger, more sure of itself, came through the speakers talking about metaphors, symbolism, the power of a single line. One clip stopped me cold. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes, it's just the last tool someone has left before they fall apart. My hand twitched toward the volume dial. For a second, I considered pulling over. But I didn't.
I just hit pause and kept going.
Past roadside diners with flickering neon signs, past gas stations where men in ball caps stood sipping coffee from foam cups. Vermont always looked like it was half asleep, and I needed that. When I pulled into the gravel drive of the cabin, Blackbird Nest, it was nearly 6. The porch groaned under my boots, and the key stuck in the door like it hadn't been used in years. Inside smelled like cedar and old dust, the kind of smell that clings to memories. There was no cell signal, but the quiet didn't scare me the way I thought it would. It felt honest. I made a small dinner, lentils from a packet, an apple sliced too thin, and a piece of bread that had gone a little stale on the drive up. I didn't turn on the radio or open a podcast. I just let the quiet settle in like an old friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. And then my phone buzzed. Just once. I stared at the screen. No contact name. Just the message. Can you come back and watch the house? I heard you went off somewhere. That's not like you. I read it twice. That's not like you. It felt like someone had pressed a thumb right into my throat. Not cruel, not angry, just that strange, familiar flattening they were so good at. Like I was a shape they'd already decided I needed to fit. I set the phone face down on the table, gently, like it might break. Then I stirred the pot again, even though the food was already cooked. My fingers tightened around the wooden spoon until my knuckles blanched. Steam rose into my glasses, and for once, I let them fog. I didn't reach for a napkin. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out onto the porch. The air was sharper now, nipping at my ankles. I pulled my coat tighter, but didn't go back in. If I returned now, I knew exactly what would unfold. They'd smile. Say, "Thank you, sweetheart," like I was still some obedient child. Mom would say, "She may be a little sensitive, but she's got a good heart." Briar would toss out something like, "You always come through, don't you?" And I'd nod. Pretend that praise didn't feel like pity. Pretend I hadn't once again traded a piece of myself for temporary belonging. I looked out at the trees, their branches swaying like they were whispering things too old for words. I closed my eyes and asked myself, not out loud, but in that inner voice that never got a seat at the table, if I keep showing up for people who never really see me, who's going to show up for me? The wind creaked through the porch boards in reply. It sounded almost like agreement. Back inside, I lit a candle. Just a small one with lavender and thyme. The kind I used to save for guests who never came. Then I opened my journal. I didn't write a manifesto. Just a few lines. Just enough to name what was happening. If I leave again, they'll say I'm selfish. If I stay gone, they'll say I've changed. But if I keep bending, I'll forget what it feels like to stand upright. I closed the journal and set it beside the candle. I didn't know what would come next. But for once, I knew what wouldn't. I wouldn't go back just to be thanked. I wouldn't be the extra set of hands or the last-minute solution.
Not this time.
I spent most of that morning at the little writing desk in the corner of the cabin, the one tucked next to the window that looked out over the trees. The light filtered in through shifting leaves, painting slow-moving shadows across the desk like something holy. I didn't touch a pen right away. I just sat there, breathing, letting myself be still, letting the stillness not feel like laziness or guilt. It took a long time to realize how much of my life had been spent reacting, rushing to fix, smooth, cushion, filling silences so no one had to sit in them. Now, I sat in one and let it hold me. When I finally reached into the drawer and pulled out the thick cream stationery Doreen had tucked in there, quietly, deliberately, I knew exactly what it was for. Not notes, not shopping lists, not even a thank you. These were pages meant for truth. I picked up the pen and started writing.
No drafts.
No filter. Just the kind of honesty that only shows up when there's no one else in the room to perform for.
Mom.
Not dear Mom. I didn't feel like performing affection in the header. If what you need is someone to bring in your mail, reset the alarm code, feed your cat, and keep your house from looking empty while you're gone, I understand.
Hire someone.
They'll do it better. They won't feel a thing when you forget to say thank you. If what you need is a daughter who appears in your Christmas letters and the occasional Facebook post, someone who shows up just enough to keep things looking whole, I can't do that anymore. Not because I hate you. I don't. Not because I'm angry, not even that. I've just run out of space inside myself to keep pretending we're close when we're not. I paused then, letting the weight of those words settle. My thumb traced the edge of the paper. I looked out the window at the way the trees bent gently in the breeze, like they knew what it was to bend too long. And then I wrote what needed to be written, what had never been said. I was 9 when I won the spelling bee. You left before the final round. Briar had soccer practice. You told me it was just a certificate. But I held that paper in my hand, alone in the bleachers, while everyone else took photos. At 16, Dad gave Briar a used car. You gave me a sheet cake from the grocery store with Sweet Girl piped in pink frosting. When I asked about driving, you laughed and said, "You're not there yet." Briar needed it more. When I got my first teaching job, I called you. You said, "That's nice, honey," and then asked if I could help you cancel your nail appointment because your tech was running behind. I know you don't remember those moments, but I do. They weren't the worst things. That's what made them hard. They were forgettable, except to me. My hand trembled slightly, but not from rage. From the release of holding something in for so long, it started to feel like part of my skeleton. I continued. None of these things broke me on their own. But together, they taught me something I didn't even know I'd learned. That I exist in your world when it's convenient. That I'm loved only in the softest, safest, quietest terms. That I am optional. I leaned back. Let the word sit. Then I finished it. So, I'm stepping out of the frame. Not to vanish, but to stand, finally, in my own picture, one where I'm not edited, softened, or asked to dim. Whatever image you present to the world next, I won't be in it. Not because I don't care, but because I do.
Love.
Maris. I folded the page neatly. No envelope. Just paper placed into a padded mailer, sealed, and addressed to the house I grew up in. I drove it 2 towns over to a post office no one in my family would ever think to visit. It felt like something sacred to drop it into that slot. That afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't need to look. Briar. I debated not answering, but I picked up. "Hey," he said, his voice overly casual. "So, I heard you went off the grid, or whatever. Mom's acting like you joined a cult. What's up with that?" I didn't answer. He kept going, laughter in his tone like this was all a joke. "Seriously, though, it was just a trip. You always get so wound up. You're sensitive. You know that, right?" I cut in calm, even. "Have you ever been in a room where everyone's laughing but you're just background? Not included, just tolerated?" He didn't respond. "That's me," I said. "Every holiday, every photo, every plan." "Jesus, Maris, you're being dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm being honest. For once." Then I hung up. My hands weren't shaking. That evening, a text lit up my screen. It was from Mom. "I didn't know you were hurting that much." I truly didn't. No emojis. No exclamation points. Just those words. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I put the phone down and walked away. Not out of spite, but because I wasn't waiting for a response to know my worth. My silence wasn't absence. It was a line in the sand, and it finally felt like mine. The next morning at the cabin felt like something had shifted, inside and outside. The air was lighter somehow, like the wind had exhaled and decided to let me breathe, too. For the first time since I arrived, sunlight poured in without hesitation, laying itself down on the hardwood floor in long, gentle ribbons. It didn't ask to be noticed. It just was. I made coffee even though I hadn't slept restlessly. I didn't need the caffeine. I just missed the smell. That quiet, earthy comfort. I didn't rush through the process either. I ground the beans slowly, boiled the water on the old stove, and poured it into the chipped blue mug I'd claimed as mine since day one. Then I sat down at the little table by the window, the one where the wood grain curled like a fingerprint, and opened my journal. This time, I wasn't writing to explain myself to anyone else. Not to Mom. Not to Briar. Not even to some imagined future therapist. This time, the letter was for me.
The real me.
The one I'd pushed into corners for years because it made other people more comfortable. I've spent a lifetime standing at the edge of the picture. I began slowly, the words spilling out as if they had waited for years in my throat. Sometimes cropped out, sometimes half in, half forgotten. Always smiling, always saying it was fine. I thought it was humility. I thought it was maturity. But the truth is, it was survival. I learned early that being too much, or even just enough, made people uncomfortable. So I made myself quiet, easy, uncomplicated. I took a long sip of coffee before continuing. I've chosen to step away now, not because I've given up, not because I'm bitter, but because I finally understand something no one ever taught me. I was always allowed to leave. I just didn't believe I had the right. I'm not asking for a spotlight. I'm not demanding center stage. I'm simply building my own frame. This time, I'll be in the middle. I set the pen down and read those last lines again. Not to edit, just to feel them. They were raw and imperfect and true. Later that afternoon, while sorting through the local newspaper Doreen had dropped off, I found a small flyer folded between the pages. An ad for a writing workshop at the community center in town. For weeks. 10 people max casual, focused on voice and self-expression. I read it twice, then without much ceremony, opened my laptop and signed up. I didn't know what I'd write about. But for once, I didn't feel the need to have all the answers. Maybe I didn't need to be profound. Maybe I just needed to be present. Afterward, I pulled up the booking site and reserved the same cabin again for summer break. Not as an escape, as a return. Just before sunset, there was a knock at the door. I didn't even have to look. I already knew it was Doreen. She stood there, holding a box wrapped in a clean kitchen towel and a small book balanced on top. "Thought you might be low on sugar," she said, handing me the box. "And I brought you something else." I grinned. "You're starting to feel like rural Amazon." She stepped inside, chuckling. "Except I don't charge for shipping. And I deliver things people actually need." We sat at the table like we had a dozen times before. Inside the box were lemon scones, still warm, soft at the edges, with that faint citrus scent that always made me think of spring. The book she handed me was slim, the cover soft white with gold embossed letters. "Peace doesn't ask permission." I turned it over in my hands, already knowing what it meant before I even opened it. "I think that title says everything," she said, sipping from her mug. "You don't have to prove you're exhausted enough to rest. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You just stop asking permission and take up the space you were born into." We ate in silence for a while. Not the kind that needed filling. The kind that tasted like trust. Then she looked at me, not pitiful, not proud, just present. "You know," she said gently, "they might never say they're sorry. They might never understand." I nodded. "But you're different now. And that," she said, tapping the rim of her cup, "is enough." I didn't mean to cry. But I did. Not because I was broken. Because something in me had been unlocked. The tears came soft and slow, and with them, a laugh, a small one, but real. I wiped my cheeks with the sleeve of my sweater. "You're not falling apart," Doreen said, watching me like she'd seen it 100 times. "You're just unfolding." That night, after she left and the fire was down to embers, I wrote one last thing in my journal. I used to think healing meant they had to admit they hurt me. But maybe it just means I stop hurting myself to stay in rooms that always ask me to disappear. I don't need closure. I need air. I don't need their apology. I need my own permission. And I have it now. Then I wrote one last line.
Carefully.
I'm not a background character in someone else's story. I'm the one holding the pen. And I didn't feel the need to explain myself ever again. It had been almost a full month since I left for Vermont. When I pulled into the school parking lot that morning, the air had that soft, early summer stillness, before the buzz of vacations and barbecues, before the calendar pages start to matter less. The building looked the same, but I didn't. I walked in without rehearsing my smile. I said hello, without performing. I wasn't hiding behind busy work or waiting to earn my space in the room. I was just here. No one asked where I'd been, and I didn't offer. It wasn't secrecy. It was peace. Not everything needed to be explained. That Thursday, just after the final bell, I was packing up when I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Beige sedan. Second-hand, but clean. My mother's. She didn't come in. She didn't call. She waited. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before walking out. The sun was low enough to make everything glow a little too brightly, and I had to squint to see her face clearly through the windshield. She got out when I approached. No dramatic gestures. No tearful rush. Just her, holding her purse like it might anchor her. She looked at me like she wasn't sure how to start. "I read your letter," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd remember all that." I nodded once. "I remember because I had to." Her eyes darted away, down toward the asphalt. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't belong." "I know," I said. "But it doesn't change that I did." There was no anger in my voice. No sharpness. Just fact. A history we both now stood inside, instead of one I carried alone. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. There wasn't going to be a big, sweeping moment. No mother-daughter movie ending. But there was silence that held truth instead of denial. That was enough. When I got home, I pulled out the old photo albums from the hallway shelf. The ones with pages that stuck together and captions written in rushed cursive. I didn't flip through them. I didn't rip them up either. I closed each one, slowly, and packed them into a box. Along with the small ceramic angel my mom gave me for Christmas when I was 25, the unused scrapbook from our trip to Maine, the candle I never lit because it was too pretty. I carried the box up to the attic, placed it in the back corner, and left it there. Not forgotten. Not erased. Just put down. That weekend, I planted lavender in a clay pot Doreen had given me. The kind with wide roots and a scent that doesn't ask for permission to linger. I stuck a small wooden marker into the soil. I wrote on it with a black Sharpie. For the softness I no longer have to apologize for. On Sunday afternoon, Doreen invited me to her place. I didn't know anyone else there, but she said I'd fit right in. And she was right. 6 women sat around her dining table. All older than me. All with a certain quiet strength in their eyes, the kind that only comes from breaking and rebuilding more than once. They passed around homemade bread, apricot preserves, and strong tea with dried mint leaves floating at the top. They talked about their gardens, their late husbands, their retirement jobs at the bookstore or the animal shelter. No one asked me where I'd been. No one needed to. One woman, Nora, leaned over at one point and asked with a curious smile, "Did your daughter ever call after she left?" I laughed. "I never had one." "Oh," she said, raising her eyebrows. "Well, I just assumed the way you were listening, someone raised you right." I thought for a second and said, "Not really, but I found the right people later." She nodded and patted my hand. "Well, sounds like family to me." That night, I sat by the front window of my home, legs tucked under me, a notebook open on my lap. The lavender pot was just outside, catching the fading sun. I wrote slowly, not to be read later, but just to mark the moment. I used to live so no one would be disappointed. Now I live so I won't forget myself again. And I smiled. Not because it was all healed, but because I had finally stopped asking permission to be whole. Before we close, I just want to say this. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't standing up for yourself. It's realizing you were allowed to all along. Maybe you felt like the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one always folding yourself smaller just to keep the peace. If so, I hope this story reminded you, peace isn't something you have to earn by disappearing. You deserve to take up space. To be seen, fully, not just tolerated, but truly held. Have you ever had a moment where you finally chose you, even if no one clapped for it? I'd love to hear about it if you feel like sharing. And if this story meant something to you, thank you for being here. I hope we meet again in the next one. Choose from a variety of voices to help you create a story worth sharing.